Who had the biggest fall from grace in history? Story 1. I'd say Vidkun Quisling. He was one of the last men to be given the death penalty in my country, and his last name is listed as a synonym for a cowardly traitor in our dictionary. He essentially sold us out to the Nazis during World War II. The thing is that he was previously seen as a good humanitarian, traveling to other countries to help the poor with Fridtjof Nansen, a national hero who won the Nobel Peace Prize. But it has later been revealed, only a couple of years ago, that he was never a good man from the start, and was in fact always a vile opportunist, regardless of what affiliation he needed to have in order to further his own reputation and build his own grandiose sense of self. Under the guise of his humanitarian work, he'd loot values from dead and dying people and give desperate, starving people food scraps or pennies for very expensive valuables, if he didn't just take them. He'd also take advantage of desperate young women. Those who had lost their families were the easiest targets, after all. His first wife was a 17-year-old Ukrainian girl named Alexandra. Even his family members were confused about it. He also got a second wife, Maria Quisling, so in addition, he was also a bigamist. Seeing the pictures and notes of what he saw in famine-stricken areas just makes what he did worse. In one of his photos, he had visited a house with 2 starving boys whose parents had presumably died, and if I recall correctly, the remaining boy in this picture had eaten his 3-year-old brother. Google Holodomor if you don't know about this famine. The thought of this gut-wrenching despair not fazing a man, not making him question what he's doing, and just continuing on to prey on people just makes me sick. I didn't think I could find a literal traitor to my country more deplorable decades after his execution, but learning what an absolutely deplorable opportunistic narcissist he was just made him even worse. To think that he was a revered humanitarian at one point, I'm glad he was executed, though I wish they had paraded him around so people could throw tomatoes at him first. It's in Norwegian, but Google Translate should do. The rest should be a quick Google search away. There are also some thesis papers available, but those are in Norwegian too. Quisling is legit the word for a collaborating traitor in English too. His name is such a perfectly weasel-sounding name for it too. It just sounds gross and already has the ling suffix on it. From what I understand, in America, our name for traitor is Benedict Arnold. He was a revolutionary officer who sold us out to the Redcoats. In the rest of the English-speaking world, it's Quisling. Makes me wonder if other countries and cultures also use famous traitors' names as a pejorative that means traitor. Well, the Greek use Ephialtes, and there's always Judas. Story 2. Most people are talking like the last decade, but Mary I of England came to my mind first, overcame huge threats and obstacles to her right to the throne because she had the support and love of the people. She defeated the attempted coup, ascended to the throne, showed mercy to the traitors, etc., then promptly married an unpopular foreigner and tried to force everyone to follow her religion. If they didn't, they got burned alive. Then hubby skipped town anyway, and Mary slowly lost her marbles, and Calais, and kept burning people alive. History tends to remember her younger half-sister, Elizabeth I, a bit more favorably. Oh my God, what have I done? My friends, Tudor history is awesome, and dramatic, and insane, and freaking tragic, and very well documented by multiple contemporary sources. Go check it out. 100 years of more drama than you can imagine. Also, Mary did all her executions over the space of her 5-year reign. Elizabeth I reigned for 45 years and still managed to execute fewer people. I am still sympathetic to Mary I. Her life freaking sucked for about 1,000 reasons. Important update here. This guy has pointed out that Mary died on this day, November 17th, 1558. I'm pretty sure we all need to go into the nearest bathroom, close the door, turn off the lights, and say Bloody Mary 3 times. And just, hope for the best. I mean, they didn't name the drink Bloody Mary because she donated blood for the needy. It was because she had celery sticking out of her head. Yeah, honestly, Mary doesn't get talked about enough. Honestly, reading her life, it kind of feels like one big tragedy. Ironically, if her brother had never died, she might have been happier. Story 3. Ian Watkins, former singer of the Welsh emo rock band Lost Prophets. Massively successful band in the scene. Turns out he dealt meth to fans to abuse them and then assault their babies and toddlers. Yep, you read that right. I almost threw up when I read the indictment. Locked away in life, that one. The band has erased all music from all services as far as possible. It's tainted forever. I read the case file. Holy cow. And when asked why he did what he did, he said he did it for the lols. His password was IFKids. And 2 of the infants' mothers sold their own babies out to him. There are text messages detailing the abuse they were planning to subject the infants to. And remember, one of his ex-girlfriends tried getting the police involved numerous times, only to be told to screw off, and no investigations being done. And then when the cops finally did something, they tried to arrest her too, under the messed up aiding and abetting BS claim, which her lawyer fought because she had years' worth of evidence against the cops showing she made an effort to report his sick butt. The whole case is one big police mess-up after another. Holy crap. I remember years before it all came out, someone shared a link to some obscure Lost Prophets fan forum where the ex was posting, trying to get people to listen to her warnings about him. Everyone on there was calling her a jealous, crazy attention horse who was making stuff up because he didn't want to screw her anymore. Was mad seeing it all hit the news, and it all turned out to be true. Sounds like she was basically shouting from the rooftops. Story 4. Felipe Patan was a national hero of France after World War I. He won the 9-month Battle of Verdun as a general and inspired hope and optimism at a time when it seemed like the war would never end. Fast forward to World War II, and he became the head of state of Vichy France and was a puppet for the Nazis. He ran Vichy state in a semi-fascist manner and constantly sought to appease the Nazis to preserve limited freedoms, including signing anti-Semitic ordinances and allowing deportation to concentration camps. At the end of the war, he was convicted of treason on all counts and originally sentenced to death before being reduced to life imprisonment by Charles de Gaulle on account of Patan's advanced age and service during World War I. De Gaulle would later summarize Patan's life as successfully banal, then glorious, then deplorable, but never mediocre. And also, the Marshal is a great man who died in 1925. The trouble is, he didn't know it. China had a similar person. Wang Jingwei was beloved for his role in the 1911 revolution, but is now viewed terribly for siding with the Japanese in World War II. His fate was different, though. He died in 1944 from a wound he got from an assassination attempt in 1939. His tomb was destroyed by the ROC army, and his burial place now has a note that calls him a traitor. Sounds like that attempt got upgraded to delayed success. Assassin 5 years later? Why did I just get an assist? Story 5. Benedict Arnold, hero general of the American Revolution, one of George Washington's best assets, felt slighted and overlooked by his contemporaries, switched sides to the British, made no difference to the war effort, died in disgrace in England. His name is now a synonym for traitor. Since this is getting some attention for anyone interested in learning more about the man, I highly recommend watching Benedict Arnold, A Question of Honor, a TV movie from 2003, starring Aidan Quinn as Arnold and Kelsey Grammer as Washington. Arnold had 2 horses shot under him, including one at the Battle of Saratoga, where he was instrumental in securing victory at Bemis Heights. Arnold was going between the lines while being shot at, unharmed for most of the battle as he urged his men on, until both he and his horse were hit with the final volley as the British were fleeing and the Americans were taking the important position. Arnold's leg was shot and broken by the horse. Following this, the British at Saratoga surrendered. This was a major inflection point of the American Revolution, showing Europeans that the Americans were serious and could beat the British on land, and soon foreign aid was given openly. Had Arnold been killed that day, all over the Northeast you would see statues to this man. Instead, there is but one monument to his injured leg in Saratoga that doesn't even say his name. Story 6. Nationally and internationally, you of course have mega stars and politicians. On a local level, I submit predatory doctor and religious leader David Farley. Over 200 accusers. Unless you're the DA, who disputes that number by saying there were only over 100 victims that came forward. So somewhere between 101 and 299. Of course, he still has his defenders, but he retired and moved out of state to be with his family, basically overnight. Note that his retirement email was sent to his patients, some of whom had appointments scheduled, without mention of losing his license to practice medicine or the lawsuit or news article dropping that week. Accusations range from medical malpractice to assault from girls and women of all ages. When he slipped out of state to be with his family, he was substitute teaching within days next door in Idaho and has now moved to Utah. At least half his kids aren't speaking with him, but my parents assure me it's all made up because, and I quote, "You really helped us out when you were sick." Yes, I know him personally, and yes, I believe the victims, and yes, I will share this story anywhere it comes up naturally. Dude should be in prison forever. How the F can they just willy-nilly decide to not proceed with a trial after that many victims come forward? This better not be the end of this. That mustard needs to face consequences. Story 7. Rosco Fatty Arbuckle. Fatty Arbuckle was an insanely popular silent movie star that had a contract in 1918 for $3 million for 3 years of films, equal to $54 million in 2021 dollars, according to Wikipedia. An unheard of amount. In 1921, he had a party at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, still there, over the course of several days. Virginia Rappe ended up dying, possibly from a ruptured bladder. She, or friends, there seems to be different versions, which is a problem with this story, accused Arbuckle of assaulting her. The newspapers went nuts, making up stories, spreading what little they had. Arbuckle had multiple trials, but was ultimately acquitted. He was dropped by the studios. Hollywood reacted by hiring Will Hayes and forming a censor board. Many of Arbuckle's films are lost because distributors and theaters would not play them. This is probably the only person I've seen on this post that was probably an innocent man. He was accused of assaulting Virginia by a woman who, by many accounts, was a prolific blackmailer, and what appears to be the predecessor of Rupert Murdoch in the media, who sensationalized it. After the third trial, which took minutes to acquit, the jury apologized to Arbuckle, saying an injustice had been done. Story 8. Robespierre. His actual death was brutal. For those who don't know, he tried to end his own life, but was stopped and ended up only blowing his own jaw off. He then was kept alive all night with a massive facial injury until he was beheaded in the morning. Just before he was beheaded, the executioner ripped the bandages off his face, and only the guillotine blade silenced his screams. One of the major events that stands out during the French Revolution for me. Didn't he also face the blade of the guillotine instead of facing the basket? I remember something about the guillotine having people face the basket so they won't have to die in a terrifying way. It is still terrifying, though. And that they had Robespierre face the guillotine blade so that his death would be more terrifying. Yeah, they did that to him. I think he was the only person out of all 16,594 people who died from the guillotine to be executed like that. The people who killed him really hated him. Story 9. Not the farthest, but Phil Spectre is worth a dishonorable mention. This was going to be my addition. The guy was a revolutionary music producer, creating the wall of sound formula. He produced music for some of the top musicians in the 60s and 70s and retired very young to his mansion in the Hollywood Hills. In 2003, he murders actress Lana Clarkson, then spends the rest of his life in prison. I forgot he died in 2021. He also is responsible for some of the most infamous courtroom photos in history. Not to mention that long before he murdered Lana Clarkson, he basically imprisoned his wife Ronnie Spector for days. And after she divorced him, he held up the Ronettes in court so they couldn't perform any of their songs for the longest time, and they didn't get a fair share of royalties based on shady contracts he had drafted to take advantage of them in the 60s. Story 10. Jimmy Savile, mega famous UK radio DJ and TV presenter. Did a ton of charity work. Was a knight of the realm. Post-death, he was revealed to be a massive pedophile, protected, and ignored by those around him for decades. Massive pedophile doesn't do it justice. He was one of the most vicious and prolific pedophiles ever in the UK's history, apparently. He also defiled deceased bodies at hospitals, if I remember correctly, because they gave him the keys to the morgue. In what possible universe does a TV celebrity need unrestricted access to a morgue after hours? The hospitals admit he was donating money to give him the keys. They also gave him access to kids in some cases. Freaking nightmare, all covered up. And mentally challenged adults as well. Really freaking creepy. I think his victims ranged from 5 to 85 or something like that. Story 11. I'm sure there are worse people, but Harvey Weinstein went from being one of the most powerful people in the world to being completely reviled and losing everything. This is the guy who had Meryl Streep and Oprah on speed dial and married to a woman 1,000 times too attractive for him. He now uses a walker, has lost his fortune and his reputation. And his dong is literally rotting off. In case you didn't know, several of the women who accused him of misconduct all pointed out that he wasn't really interested in doing it per se, he just wanted massages. According to some, his hygiene was so poor, he developed an infection on his dong, which then rotted the flesh after being left untreated. He basically got gangrene on his genitals and was effectively impotent. He's been described as having fish-like genitals. Ick. What the frick does that even mean? Story 12. By the time I was a child, Bill Cosby was so universally recognized as an icon of wholesome comedy that one of the most popular kids' shows of my youth was literally just a cartoon about his childhood. Now the legacy of that little cartoon show is tainted by the very subject of the show itself. That's a fall from grace. From being trusted to be a part of your kid's formative years to becoming one of the most vile and disliked men of all time. I don't know how I didn't realize that Little Bill was by Cosby until right now. Guess I just never paid enough attention. That's quite a stain on my childhood now. I thought you guys were referring to Fat Albert. Dang, I'm old. Story 13. He was never the biggest star, but Mark Salling's fall from grace was massive. Went from the star of a primetime show to being charged with CP and passing away in a matter of months. On that note, Allison Mack went from the actress of the breakout character on a long-running popular superhero show to a cult leader who trafficked women and forced labor, blackmailed them, branded them, and tortured them. There's also Grace Park, one of the stars of Battlestar Galactica and Hawaii Five-0, who was part of that cult too. I think she left though. One of her co-stars was, and still is, a big part of it though, and actually married Mac. Nikki Klein. She was Callie on BSG. Story 14. Fred Phelps started his career as a celebrated civil rights lawyer in Kansas, followed up Brown versus Board of Education 20 years later, and ended up forcing them to implement more fair educational conditions for students of color. Went on to form the Westboro Baptist Church, which became one of the most despicable hate groups in the U.S., notorious for their homophobia and protesting at military funerals. That church was one of the most reviled hate groups in the 90s and 2000s. Story 15. Rudy Giuliani. After the attacks of 9/11, he brought New York City together as a mayor on SNL and threw out the first pitch at Yankee Stadium, was really liked by everyone. Then he was Trump's lawyer and held a press conference at the wrong Four Seasons and is now seen as a bumbling idiot yes man who does whatever Trump wants. Story 16. Henry VIII has to be up there. He was a famously handsome, pious, and noble young king, very in love with Catherine when they were married, and over time he became the wife-killing tyrant we know today. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. There was an old king named Henry Finnegan, had a wife named Anne Boleyn, cut her head off, place in Binnigan, poor old Henry Finnegan begin again. Story 17. OJ has to be up there. What would the Terminator franchise be like if James Cameron didn't think he was too nice to play a killer? I'd be also curious what Schwarzenegger's career would look like without his most iconic role. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.